We need a list
Now, wait a
that's,
minute.
not getting-
And what did Connie say?
Well, we didn't goose you.
Millie's handicapped.
We didn't goose you.
Do I hear a workers' comp claim coming?
No, I just had a knot pop up right.
Hey, it's next Monday, State of the City.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
Pardon. 11:30. Be there or be square, right?
Yeah.
I'm gonna try to be there.
Tables set together? or-
Yes.
You have a table?
11:30. I asked you, and
I
you
have a
told me.
table for you.
No.
Anybody wants to
We
come?
can do the. Together?
Yeah.
No, together.
Yeah, okay.
Sing it together
You
again.
need a reservation, so.
Marvin,
But do I
what?
need to pay for it too? How
I
much
put it
is
in my
it?
pocket.
So.
I think you did.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
Hit
We've
it.
got a quorum.
I have enough money with me.
Are we
We
ready?
pay at the door.
Well, and Andrew's still playing with this pie chart.
But,
So 11:30 Monday, it's the same day as our,
Let's go ahead and call the meeting to order, please.
same day.
that's Cardone.
Oh, Andrew, that was close.
Tonight, we're meeting in workshop session. First time the council's met in just a workshop session. We can take no action during this meeting, but it's for our educational purposes. The record will reflect that all council members are present except Mr.
And
Lesby,
he's on his way.
and he's on his way.
He
So
was
I'm
going to the courthouse for a meeting and coming back here.
good, good.
He told me to tell you.
Who's more important?
What we had discussed with the council is to try and bring more information about this very complex issue that's going to be difficult to deal with as we go forward. We've worked to have more information for you tonight. We have our consulting engineers back with us this evening. We've checked with a couple of other cities. I think I mentioned to you all on the bus that we spoke with one of the communities that is much further down the pike than we are in this process, and their only advice was that we not use them as a model. I did have a chance to talk with the Kentucky League of Cities today to see what kind of information they're working on being able to bring to us. Since this is an issue that's going to affect a lot of their member cities. They did get back with me and give me some anecdotal information about what Winchester has been going through. And apparently Winchester is further down this pike. The mayor of Winchester simply commented to the inquiry from KLC that not sure who you're asking on behalf of, but wish them good luck. We are $45 million into this process. Now, that to me is a staggering number, and I'll want to verify that number, but it just highlights the magnitude of this issue. KLC agrees that this is a matter of real importance for communities, and we need information. We need models to follow. We need model ordinances. And they've agreed, they agree with our assessment that they need to be putting together a working group of communities that are in similar circumstances to ours, where we can share information, share resources, share what works, what doesn't work, and not be out here on our own, albeit with great consulting engineers. There's some safety in numbers. We even talked about, it may be premature to talk about, but we even talked about there may be a time in our future when a group of cities want to collectively go to Atlanta to visit with the EPA district and seek not relief, but perhaps advice and timing and things of that nature. We also learned that in a great example of how serious the EPA is about this issue, we have learned that in Kentucky, the Division of Water is our version of the EPA. Isn't that correct, Mike? There was a point in time when the Division of Water was working with some cities and actually considering giving those cities, the EPA dictates that these things be fixed when they come in, that it all be fixed in 10 years. I think a lot of cities were appealing to the Division of Water about getting a longer timeline with which to deal with it, and thereby reducing your annual cost. And cities were making appeals to the Division of Water that that timeline be extended to 15 or 20 years. The simple fact that those discussions were taking place, the information I got today is that the EPA came in and took that authority away from the Division of Water and insisted that these things be corrected on 10-year time schedules. Just an indication of little to no leniency as we work on this. So with that little bit of a backdrop, that great good news to start you off with, I'd like to turn this over to Andrew and Kyle to tell us where we are.
Well, thank you, Council, for coming out tonight. Had a lot of meetings lately. But if you can recall, the presentation we had last time was in regard to post-construction maintenance of these best management practices that are installed on various subdivisions or commercial properties. And I think Andrew's going to go through a little bit of this flow chart that he's created.
I'll apologize in advance because I should have known. I should have known better. But no, the point of the flow chart, it actually is a very helpful exercise for me.
Because you understand it.
Well, the great news for you all is you don't really need to understand about 98% of what's there. It's when we can move around lines so that we can see how the ordinance is going to work. But you see the little question mark down there in the bottom left. That's really what tonight is all about. That's for you all to understand where in this process we're really lacking council input. All of the other stuff, believe it or not, a lot of that stuff is already in place in a way. The stuff about standards of applicability and things like that, it needs to be retooled considerably. But a lot of that is already in our existing ordinance. So what we're really talking about tonight is the EPA mandates and our KPDS permit with the state mandates that as part of post-construction stormwater quality, we have an ordinance that essentially directs long-term maintenance of these stormwater best management practices.
Just think detention basin.
Detention
That's the easiest
basins,
visual for
open space.
you all to think about. But it involves a lot more than just that. But whenever you hear BMP, just think detention basin right now.
Yeah.
It'll make it a lot easier.
Think
for you.
about the two big ponds that sit right outside of Lowe's. Those are commercial stormwater BMPs, and they're specifically dry sediment basins or dry basins.
Dry detention basin.
Dry detention basins. So when it rains, water from the parking lot goes to those detention basins, fills up, and slowly filters back in through the ground. That is treating stormwater quality and quantity, right? So the point of this whole exercise is to determine on a future basis, in other words, not things that aren't there now, but things that will be there in the future, who is going to be responsible for doing the maintenance? And by what mechanism we enforce that? I see a question.
When you say that, okay, I visualize those two ponds at Lowe's. Who maintains those?
Same question.
It should be the owners of the property.
But they don't, we do, like the one
Well-
at Richfield, right?
No. I guess the easiest way to answer your question is, right now, there is no ordinance which dictates who's responsible for that.
Okay, gotcha.
Now, that said, informally, or maybe not informally, but through a different channel, planning and zoning has essentially made for commercial developments, and somebody correct me when I get this wrong,
I think for the most part, yeah.
for commercial developments, they have said, look, as part of this process, there are bonding requirements in place, there are maintenance requirements in place, there are inspections in place. They go out and they do periodic inspections of these, and they say, if you aren't in compliance, then you've got to be. Now, it's not very thorough at this point, and it's sort of on the fly kind of thing. But particularly the construction or the commercial best management practices are,
They have a leg up.
they have a, that's a good way, thank you for putting it. None of what we're doing tonight is addressing what the biggest problem is, which is the ones that are out there and are getting no maintenance. This is designed to fix the problem that exists now going forward.
Right.
So the three areas of this we would have commercial, residential, and
Well, look at the 4 boxes down there. There's several different ways of splitting it out.
like, you think I can see that?
All right,
I
the first
can
one is
see it.
city-owned property. That one's obvious. We're responsible for that.
Right.
The next one is commercial. And I lumped everything under commercial because typically commercial, most ordinances, most cities say commercial property, you're responsible for doing everything. Just touch the mouse pad. And then you have two types of residential maintenance. And I split it out as mowing and repair / maintenance. What a lot of cities do,
Oh, yeah. I can see it.
what a lot of cities do is say, okay, homeowners or property owners, you are always going to be responsible for things like mowing or reseeding of grass or simple maintenance. Bowling Green actually says their standard is,
It's not written in.
it's not written anywhere, but their informal standard is if it takes less than 30 minutes and you can do it with a shovel, it's your responsibility. I think that's more of an anecdotal thing.
The rule of thumb.
But it's a rule of thumb, thank you. But that you get the idea. You really don't need to take a picture. I can get you the file, you know. So that would be some of the ways of splitting it out. And when you start talking about hybrids, you're really what you're really talking about is splitting those things up in a different way. Not saying, well, homeowners or property owners are responsible for everything, or the city is responsible for everything. Those would be the opposite ends of the spectrum, and then you'd have this hybrid option where we would maintain some things, they would maintain others. And as Kyle will tell you, if you think it out really well, you could do this on a BMP by BMP basis. So in other words, for every different type of BMP, say you got a dry basin, there's a list of maintenance tasks, and Kyle's going to show you some of those. Let's say every year you have to inspect the, let's see, he's going to pull up some of them. Inspect pipes, inspect the riser, monitor sediment. That's 1 to 3 years that you would do that, every 1 to 3 years. Every 5 to 25 years, you would use remote television to inspect the reverse slope pipes under drain. You get my point. You could split these out and say, okay, you homeowner are responsible in this BMP for doing the monthly or quarterly maintenance. We are responsible for doing the bigger maintenance, or we're responsible for making repairs to the pipes or infrastructure. You are responsible for dredging. You get my point. You
Yeah.
have flexibility. You don't have to
Because-
have a,
Because there's some things, a landowner, if you tell the landowner that that's your responsibility, they're not gonna do it right,
that's right. There's some things you don't necessarily want.
you know?
We're going like up into Bradford with all that open ground and all that water that runs through there. How important is it now that every subdivision or new home, place built into the city has the homeowner association, that they can handle some of this stuff? That it might have to be a requirement when you build a new sub, you have to have that put in place.
Well, and the example I'll use there is Copperfield. Is that the name of it? Where the big pond is?
Yeah, on the corner, all the way down
Copper
on
Kettle?
Reading,
Oh, yeah.
all the way down the
Yeah,
corner,
right.
rail, that big
Yeah.
lake right
They have a
there.
very big,
Yeah.
and that's a wet
Reading.
pond, right? And so that's designed, and it holds a lot of water, and
Yeah.
all of the stormwater from that surrounding neighborhood, including Willow Lane, drains into that pond, and there are things like filters and all kinds of maintenance requirements that come with that type of BMP, and your surrounding homeowners can't take care of that
Right.
on their own. I mean, they own it jointly. So, and a single homeowner can't really do anything about it.
Right.
It's going to rely either on the developer having maintained control, and no developer in their right mind is going to do that. And then it's going to have to fall to an HOA or some other method of common ownership, someone that we can have a maintenance agreement with if we took that. If instead we did all the maintenance, then really the developer doesn't really care, because the developer is going to give that entire thing in an easement to the city, and the city is going to be responsible for it, doing the annual dredging and whatever you have to do. Somebody jump in when I say something crazy, but that's the idea. Those are your two options, and within those two options, there are a variety of little nuances that we can do to help us control costs or swing things one way or the other. But what we're really looking for tonight is a conversation about what these things mean, and we would like to be able to give you all some sense of what the costs are, and we've done our best to try to put some things together, but a lot of these things are in engineering speak. No offense. They'll tell you what the cost is, but they'll tell you it's per acre foot, or Kyle, help me here.
Sorry, I was paying attention. Pulling up an example of how some responsibilities are split out. This is Hopkinsville. And as you can see, they have various, this is more of a hybrid route. But it outlines different responsibilities for different positions. I had a much better example. I'm having trouble finding it.
Andrew, I got a question.
Sure.
I'm not sure about if our class of city allows us to have different taxing districts or different taxing rates. So if we had a development that had a lot of these BMPs, it was gonna take a lot of maintenance to keep them up, could we not assess a different property tax rate for that development to maintain that?
No. You have to, your property tax classifications are very, the distinctions are very specific, and that would not be, based on my knowledge, I'll look into the question, but based on my knowledge, that would not be a proper classification method.
So you could do a special assessment tax for that purpose?
That's another question. A special assessment is a different question than having different property tax rates. Yeah, you for a special project, you could do special assessments. The problem with special assessments is I believe they have to be voted on by the taxpayers.
Well, at this point, we're talking about new development. It would be the new developer
Right.
who would have to agree to that to get the development through.
The development rights.
Well, that's certainly a unique way of looking at it. It's possible, but my gut says you can't do that. You cannot draw that kind of distinction. Now, where you could do it is, that's kind of the whole idea of the stormwater utility. It's a specific fee that is designed to take care of a specific stormwater problem. And you could set up the fee structure such that it places that have higher than normal impervious surface density pay more. That's the whole idea of a stormwater utility fee based on impervious surfaces is if I own 2 acres of land and it's all open space, I pay 0 in stormwater utility fee. But if I have a 3-acre parking lot, then I'm going to pay a whole lot in a stormwater utility fee. That's sort of the idea of why you do the stormwater utility fee route, is it's naturally based on where you have more costs, where you have more maintenance responsibilities. But doing it with property taxes is very difficult. I don't even know that it's possible.
And then the problem that you run into with the stormwater utility fee, and you're talking about the impervious, the parking lots and stuff, when you have like Toyota and Kroger and Walmart and all of those big commercial places have done their due diligence with the stormwater and then go back and put on
A fee,
stormwater
yeah.
utility fee
On top of them.
on top of them. That's what,
Ex-
that's what causes the problem. And you can get a credit
You
back,
can.
but it's not a very big credit. And if the state or someone would give us more leniency with that, the rest of it, as far as a stormwater utility fee, would be the perfect way to do it, and do it through the water company with special software.
We actually have complete control over what the credits are and aren't. If we want to
That was
give
not my understanding.
if we want to give 100% credit, we can give 100% credit.
So if
It
we
all
can do
comes
that,
down.
That's the way to do it.
It all comes down to
That would be.
how much you have to pay for it. I mean, in other words, if we're willing to give 100% credit for a commercial structure that can prove on paper that it reduces its stormwater runoff to 0, then theoretically the cost should equal out to 0.
But we're not talking about stormwater fee tonight, are we?
No.
So I
What-
was reading what he pulled up there on the property. It looks like that's the city of Danville. I mean, is that right, Danville? That looks, from what I could read here, that looks like that's all would be very logical that a property owner or an HOA would take care of that part.
Right.
Yeah.
Because actually a piece of property Mom owns, when it was built, they put in a retention pond. I don't think it does any retention, but nevertheless, it's been there for 20 plus years, and we've had to mow it, take care of it, do all the maintenance, keep the trees. I mean, we've done all of that because it was on our property. So, I mean, that looks like that's kind of, it's the way it should be. I mean, what do you think, Kyle, since you, I mean, that doesn't seem unfair to anybody that would have that on their property.
I think it really just comes down to how you want to split costs. The cost is going to be the same regardless. It's just, well, whether you put this amount on the homeowner and this amount on the city, or less on the homeowner and more on the city.
Well, if
That's
you're
essentially-
talking about eventually you're gonna put a tax on it, then you wanna put less on the homeowner and more on the city if you're gonna talk about taxes down the road. But tonight, we're just talking about the maintenance responsibility, right? And then it can be changed later. Is that not what we said last time?
It can be changed.
Change it anytime, he said, yeah.
Yeah.
But we needed to do this to get it past the 31st?
Yes.
Okay.
23rd.
And are we not really talking about future development?
That's what we're talking about.
Not about everything that's existing right now.
Not yet, but
Just future.
I mean,
Down the road, we may.
at some point, that may be
Right
a
now, the
requirement.
problem
yes.
is an ordinance
Correct.
for future development.
Correct.
Okay.
For future development and probably any plans that are currently not approved that are going through planning and zoning, they would probably also be included.
Probably any place that hasn't broke ground yet. What
So
you're
if I
talking about.
have,
Yeah.
if I've bought a new home and just so happens out my back door is where the water's flowing down and I have one of those detention ponds, that is not, I do not think that's unreasonable to expect me to take that responsibility of taking care, or what they have outlined, to take care of that responsibility. And one of the things that's on there, somewhere I saw, that you don't put the obstacles, the fences, the gazebos, all that. We've got that all over town where people put those where they shouldn't have put it. So if you've got that in there as a new homeowner, but somehow that needs to get to the person that bought the home to
Correct.
understand, here's your responsibility.
Absolutely.
That's, I think, where we would fall down. I don't think that's unreasonable, but I think that's where we fall down, that they
That's
don't
actually
know.
already in place for everywhere.
Yeah, I think that's the hardest thing, is that it's understood, and policing that, because everybody would do it, most people would, but it would be maybe the absentee homeowner or the person that couldn't. That's kind of the challenge, it seems to me, in all this.
Where
I know
it
it-
gets,
you
I'm sorry,
know.
honey, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, at Pavilion Courtyards, they have that big detention basin right there, but their HOAs take care of that.
Yeah.
So, in my mind, creating an HO, every new
That's what I
development
said, yeah.
Well, that
that's
might
done
make sense.
as an HOA, that will be a part
Yeah.
of it in their bylaws,
And their
that they
understanding.
maintain that.
That will be a good outcome if we can get to that point. The thing that I want us to keep in mind, that even if we assign this responsibility to citizens or homeowners associations, we are still going to have an obligation over every 5-year cycle to inspect every one of these best management practices ourselves.
Right.
Which means on some 20% of them every year are going to have to be inspected. And if corrective action is needed, we've got to go to the property owner and attempt to force that to happen. If they don't do it and it's affecting the performance of that BMP, we're going to have to do it anyway. It's going to require where some of our cost will creep up, even under the best scenario, is that the engineering office is going to have folks that are purely dedicated to this function.
That's what I wrote down.
So we are going to experience higher cost. We looked at, we'll probably have to look at a street sweeper. We're going to have to look at either on a contract basis or a purchase basis, our ability to inspect some of these underground BMPs, best management practices that involve pipes or culverts or things of that nature. So, and we can't escape that obligation regardless of who's responsible. When I mentioned to the council, and I mentioned it today in my conversation with the Kentucky League of Cities folks, that our concern is this could fundamentally change our relationship between the city and our citizens. It's that even if they accept the responsibility, we have to monitor it and we have to insist that the things be done. Thinking through this to its logical conclusion, that means we would literally have to have a contract between the city and every homeowners association, or between the city and every homeowner. Think of the administrative burden
Oh, boy.
of maintaining that. And policing it and trying to make sure that this work is done. So even under what appears to be the most simple scenario going forward, there are real difficulties from the municipality's point of view. And I think what we wanted to do tonight is simply make sure that we've completely discussed through all the implications of each approach, so that we don't make a decision with part of the information discussed, and even at the risk of being repetitive and wearing you out with it, it's our obligation to make sure we understand all of the outcomes from any of the choices we make. We also think that, Chuck, to your point, it's very likely that we may start off using one path. But if and when the day comes that we have to look at historical properties, we have to change paths because our mechanism won't be strong enough to deal with that historical look. So we just want to get started off on the best foot we can and not have surprises for the council when citizens come in and they're angry over us forcing them to take some action with the best management practice on their property.
Andrew, sorry, Mayor, I didn't mean to cut you.
No, I was
Since we're obviously talking about future development, can we as a city body or planning and zoning as a body force developers to create an HOA in a planned residential development?
Well, let me try to answer that in a different way than you've asked it. I don't know that you can force them to have an HOA, but that's sort of the model. Anytime a developer is going to be the owner of a piece of property that serves multiple households, is going to be saddled with a responsibility. That is going to be the mechanism that they use, is a homeowners association. There really isn't any other mechanism that I'm aware of short of a taxing district or something like that. A person who owns a piece of property is going to turn it over to a collective agency that represents all of those owners, who has the authority to collect from those owners for common maintenance. But the question, the better question for us is not whether we can force the developer to create an HOA, but whether the city can force the HOAs to function as they were intended. I think we can do that. I think we can. It's a question I asked the League of Cities months ago. We were having a work session of abandoned property and blighted property type things, and I said, can we, under the state law, or can we get a provision in the state law that essentially says when a developer represents that things that the city would otherwise do, otherwise maintain, are satisfied, requirements of our subdivision regs are satisfied through the representation of a developer who says, don't worry, the HOA will take care of it. We as a city have a recourse of saying, if in the event that you don't, we have the authority to reconstitute your HOA and essentially force a receiver who would manage it until it gets back on its feet, or who would appoint the appropriate people when the developer fails to do it or when the homeowners fail to do it. So that's a major failing point, is the planning is great, and the developer says, I can show you on paper how this is all going to pay for itself, and then it never pans out. So the developers usually get the first part right. Yeah, we'll have an HOA, and we'll cover all those costs. They'll even go so far as to say, here's the fee that they have to pay, and here's how it's going to pay for. Here's the math. But then it either fails, or it never gets set up, or they stop collecting it. That's where the real teeth need to be.
Can the city go back and implement HOAs? I know we're supposed to be moving forward, but in residential areas that don't have HOAs?
HOAs are completely a private entity, but if you had, I think if you had a law, an ordinance that says, I don't know about retroactive, but it's worth considering. If you have a law that says where the developers have represented that an HOA is part of the subdivision's maintenance model, why would you not try to reconstitute those ones that were originally intended to be there and never were? And maybe that's something that could be accomplished, rather than it being accomplished by law, could be accomplished through
Communication.
communication and aid and education.
Try the colony, see how well that works.
Yeah.
It didn't.
Exactly.
$50 a year.
Yeah, that's our example of how it doesn't work when you go backwards.
No, I
Um,
can't go back.
Well, we gotta move forward though, right? So we have to come up with information on how they're gonna be maintained and inspected from here forward, correct?
Well, the frequency of inspection is pretty well set by our requirements for the permit, but as the method of inspection, the forms used, I mean, that's all stuff that can be done internally. Most of the ordinance is pretty straightforward. We have a lot of examples. It's just who's going to take care of what is really the direction that we need, and then we can really finish drafting the ordinance for you all to read.
So we can break it up, right? HOAs can be responsible for some,
Homeowners for some.
homeowners for some.
City
commercial
for some.
City
Commercial.
for some.
Mhm.
And actually, I was writing it like property owners, because I kind of like what they've got on there, the stuff that's on their property. If it's a pond, detention pond, and it's on my property, then yeah, I think I should be responsible for it. If it's a retention pond and it's behind my property and there's spots like you were talking the other pond, then that's not. That would be a homeowner's kind of responsibility if there's a homeowner's there. But then the inspections, of course, are city's responsibility. Commercial property is the developer and the business afterwards until whatever they put in reaches into either city right of way or state right of way. But then what you talked about earlier about if it's something like pipes, things like that, that's beyond just the basic maintenance, even on commercial property, may not be something that's handled by commercial property. So that's,
Most cities continually have commercial properties to maintain their own infrastructure on their property.
and how much interest, well, I mean, define that a little bit better.
I believe it's anything that comes up to their property line.
Anything up to their property line.
Is that? Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Those ponds, those retention ponds outside of Lowe's are the perfect example of what they're required to maintain. They'd be required to maintain the inlets to that,
The catch basins,
The
the
catch
pipes on their
basins.
property, yep.
desediment that pond every 20 to 25 years.
And who inspects that?
Down. 5.
Who inspects that? How do you know they're doing that?
That would be my department.
Okay.
That's what happens in the future. That's what
Yes.
the city's responsible for, is
Yes.
to go out and make sure all
Okay.
of these
Yes.
things have been
Now-
maintained accordingly.
Some cities set up programs where these businesses or whoever has the BMP can self-inspect and report.
Okay.
Some cities go so far as it has to be done by someone certified by the city. So it's not just someone who doesn't know what they're looking at sending you a report, you know.
So, and as long as they send you the report and sign off on it, then if they've signed off on it, if, let's say the EPA comes in, then you can say, hey, you need to go talk to the landowner because here's the reports they've signed off on.
I don't think so.
If it doesn't work that way, then there's no point. We might as well just inspect it.
I kind of agree with you, but
You're safer inspecting.
I agree.
Yeah.
Because we're gonna bite the bullet regardless.
Kyle, tonight though, are we trying to answer questions to those 4 bullet points? Is that what we're,
No, that's just what Dan told me.
okay.
I'm sorry, Dave, we flipped this up just as a conversation, jump off point. I
About
think
my 4 bullet points or his 4 bullet points?
the
Those,
4 that he was
Yeah.
looking at up there.
We're trying to figure out who's gonna pay, how they're gonna pay.
I know.
management practice has different nuances to what you need to look for. So, I feel like
And Karen, what I don't want a property owner to have happen to them is if I buy a house and it's got a retention basin and I say, okay, I'm gonna mow that and that's gonna be my maintenance. And if it's got a concrete outflow or something,
Yes.
and there's a point down the road when that needs repair, am I gonna be responsible for repairing that?
See.
If somewhere along the line, I've owned this property for 25 years and I sell it to you, and you find out the next year, oh, you've got to dredge that pond, but you weren't aware of that. That's going to be a problem.
Well, I think though, if we use Danville's example, what they talked about that they had to maintain, they didn't talk about those major problems. They were just talking about, if I read that right, they were just talking about more about the daily mowing and making sure that things weren't built on it and that type of thing, wasn't it?
For the most part, yes.
Yeah, the major situations, because I don't think residents would know how to do it anyway. And I don't know if they would even know the proper person to call or when to call. So I think following Danville's example for their property owners, I think that was a pretty good one, because there's nothing on there that I wouldn't feel comfortable that I couldn't do. Now, if it came to fixing the concrete pipe or dredging out the concrete, I wouldn't have a clue. Wouldn't know who to call, wouldn't know what to do.
So would we make those more major repairs a city responsibility?
Yeah, I think you would do that.
We need to some way get an idea of what those potential future costs would be.
Yeah, that's
Because
really
they could
it.
be staggering
Yeah.
and catch us in an off-budget year, or when we,
Yeah, that's
you know,
awesome.
policemen like raises, firemen like raises, and
how-
cleaning out retention ponds isn't very sexy.
How in the world could you do, as far as what we have to do immediately, you can't really put a number to that, because
You don't
you
know
couldn't
what's
do
there.
that.
You don't know,
Because it's not, first of all, it's
Bad
not
the
there.
situation.
But
Yeah.
there are estimates
Estimated,
that we have based
yeah.
on what it typically costs to maintain a wet pond, a small, a medium, and a
Yeah,
large
but
wet
everything
pond.
we're talking about right now, you can't put a dollar amount on it because you don't know what it's going, what it is. It's not there. It hasn't been created yet.
That's true. You can't. That's what we're up against, is you can't.
Yeah.
And again,
Yeah.
that's why you
Estimate
need to probably look at a stormwater utility fee for monies being put back specifically for those issues down the road that you're not gonna be able, you're not gonna know. You're not gonna know, and if you do that, and in 5 years you do have to fix the concrete thing, the money's gonna be there for you to be able to do it. And you're gonna be held accountable for the money. But, anyway, we're not supposed to talk about fees tonight, I know, but.
There's a lot of cost material out there, except it's somewhat convoluted because it refers to percentage of construction cost is how much your analyzed cost should be around. Some of it refers to how much impervious area that the pond treats. And that's kind of hard to quantify. So this came out of North Carolina. I found this guy online. This was actually data he took from, he's a doctor. He took this data from, he surveyed 24 to 40 different municipalities. And these are some of the costs that they've came up with for annual spending. So, you know, the top one, dry detention basin.
I can't read it either.
Let's say wet pond and small.
Blow it up.
Binoculars, please.
Dry pond. So they said a small one's about 0.2 acres and a large one's 2 acres.
Okay.
So my property is a third of an acre, so I'm sure you can relate a little bit to how big that pond is actually going to be. So for the small one, it's about $850 a year in operations and maintenance costs. And then for the large one, it's about $2,000. So that's just a rough idea. That does include mowing, so, you know, obviously some of that pie, of that cost would be off on.
Because you're not gonna dredge, like if you just have a regular detention pond, since that's what we used to start the example, you're not gonna dredge that every year.
No.
How,
15, 20 years at the,
you're just
Luckily
mowing,
then, yeah.
maintenance, the maintenance of mowing it is your biggest cost for most of the life until something happened to it.
If there's any kind of drainage and stuff in there, you're gonna have to at least look at it and clean them out, aren't you?
Yeah,
well,
That's
that'll
gonna
co-
be a yearly or
sometimes even monthly.
Probably
twice, yeah,
yearly.
monthly thing that you have to do. When people mow, they don't pay attention where they
Throw
aim
it.
that thing.
Where they
What's
throw
that
it.
saying? Where the grass comes out, you know what I'm saying.
Yeah, I know what you
I know
mean.
what you meant.
that would be the mower discharge.
Or discharge.
They're not gonna bag it.
They're not
That's
bagging.
what we
No,
call it.
They're not bagging.
The discharge.
But that stuff, if it's mowed right and blowed out in a 2/10 of an acre, that stuff will rot and go right into the ground now.
Correct.
And it's good for the ground because it softens that ground up, so the moisture, when it comes, it goes down into the ground deeper. Now, I know that for a fact,
And
because I'm a farm boy.
just everything is And this whole issue has got a flip side of the coin to it. That is difficult. We've got our experts here. Are any of these questions,
Scaring you? Scaring us.
anything you all
I got a specific
feel the
question
need to
for-
respond for?
I have a question for
Good.
you. So, there was a really big arrow in my flow chart that went from public works to the maintenance requirement. And the point of that is, I'm envisioning a situation where let's say that we chose the owner responsibility track, if you will. And we say that commercial property owners are responsible for dredging their ponds every 20 or 5 or whatever it is years. And they don't do it. Well, the ultimate response that we have through the enforcement mechanism it's the same enforcement mechanism that code enforcement uses. You give them a notice, you have a certain amount of time to do this. If you don't do it, we're going to come in and do it. We end up paying for it anyway. My question is there a mechanism by which, and we have to have a contract with these people, a maintenance contract. The law says we got to have a written contract with them for the maintenance of their property. Is there a way for us to have in there if you don't want to do it, you pay us to do it?
There are mechanisms, like, for example, in Lexington,
Mike, would you come up to the podium? We may have some home viewers.
just cite a model that I'm familiar with, and that's the model in Lexington. And they actually have the maintenance type agreements that you refer to that are signed. And within the framework of those agreements, there are certain what ifs, for example, noncompliance, what that might mean in terms of citations or some action on the part of the government, in this case the city, to step in and make corrective actions on their own part. So they have that set out in their actual program and in their guidance manuals that oversee their program that define it, that allows them to do that. So the mechanisms are there for that purpose. And I'm sure that that's structured, when you look at the ordinance, the enabling ordinance allows certain things to be placed within a policy manual that is then used for the implementation side of things.
I think what I'm maybe this is a question more for the council. I don't know. I think what I'm ultimately asking is, let's say we go to a particular location, the pond outside of Lowe's, and we determine based on mathematical formulas, based on experience, based on the things that we know, you all know as engineers, here are the annual maintenance cost of a pond. Here's what we have to do every 5 years. Here's what we have to do every 10 years. And the cost is X, or we can reasonably anticipate that it's X. Instead of a tax, or instead of saying it's your responsibility, what if we could give the owners of the property an option to say, we will pay you, the city, a monthly fee or a yearly fee or a when it's due fee to do this maintenance at our own option, at our own election. Each individual property owner, as a function of their contract, can say, I hereby agree to pay this much in maintenance costs that is specifically designated for the maintenance of that pond. I know that sounds like an administrative nightmare. I'm just thinking outside of the box here.
The whole thing sounds like an administrative nightmare, regardless
It
of what
does.
we do.
Well, I'm asking devil's advocate questions here. If we're talking about, let's say you've got a particular stormwater feature that you know is very, very expensive. It's going to cost you $100,000 a year to maintain it. You're saying there's no such thing?
I don't think so.
All right.
Maybe in New York City.
Take the most expensive underground storage facility you've got and think about what it might cost you in terms of retention or in terms of maintenance costs. Have any of these other cities considered options such as that? The model or the permit says that we have to have maintenance agreements or some other enforceable mechanism for ensuring maintenance. And I'm just trying to think of other potential enforcement mechanisms that we might think of other than either we do it or they do it.
Would that include, like the one back to Lowe's? That's a good example. So does that include us then going out with mowing it and all that as well? Because Lowe's has gotten in trouble several times, property owner that, of not mowing it when they're supposed to.
You could give them the option. You could say, well, we'll do the mowing and the city will do the annual maintenance, or the city will do everything.
If that was a business, I'd turn it over to the city and say, have at it. I'll pay it.
I mean, it might make sense, and if you could look at it that way and not call it a fee, because it's at their option.
Be a tax deduction for them too,
Yeah.
maintenance.
I think that makes sense.
But what would
in a
you
lot
do
of
though,
ways.
on the flip side of that? Let's just use that as an example. What happens if that property changes hands? Are you
That
gonna
is
have to go
covered-
back out there and get a second?
Well,
Or the administrative portion of
I
that?
think you would. I think that part of it you would, but the requirement for the maintenance is forever. It's
Goes with
set
the
by,
property.
it's
Yeah.
set by, what's the word I'm looking for? Covenant.
Deed restriction.
It's,
Yeah.
it's binding on all owners. But you could make it such that new owners could change their option. The-
They could take
Andrew, let me ask you this question. I feel like some of what we're talking about, it may already be, it may already be addressed through planning and zoning.
Get into structural repairs.
Walmart, I know they've got a maintenance agreement with some company that goes around the country cleaning out their detention ponds, mowing them and maintaining them each and every year. I see them out there, I've talked to them. I know that's being done and they're paying the full load for it.
Right.
Kroger's doing, they've got the same deal. So aren't some of these things already gonna be covered through planning and zoning?
Yes.
Yes. But we're supposed to make a policy
Some,
that
but
covers
not all.
That's,
Yeah.
Going
you
forward.
nailed it.
We have to
You-
get
Yeah.
policy
That's
for
right.
everybody.
And we don't want to do
Yeah.
anything to say to the Walmarts of the world, the people who are doing what they're supposed to be doing, to change that if we don't
Can't
have
go on
to.
doing it, yeah.
All right,
Yeah.
But you're not changing it anyway for them, because this is from today forward.
Yeah.
I
It's
understand.
another
It's new.
Well, back to the detention pond. You were looking at that detention pond in somebody's yard that lives in a subdivision with, a few hundred homes. That detention pond could service, obviously it services everybody upstream, which, that could be a significant number of homes. So then I guess I'd ask the question, is it that homeowner? I mean, should they be the one that are really paying the expense to maintain it when it's benefiting everybody upstream?
I agree.
And that's when you're typically not going to get an individual homeowner having the responsibility.
I know, but that's
Going
kind of
to
what
be-
I was hearing, is that was a possibility, or is a possibility.
Yeah.
Except for the.
Going to be
except for-
HOA.
Except for the capital improvement part of it, in terms of the concrete and whatever, the
But
cleaning out.
honestly, I don't know anybody that has that, well, that doesn't mean this because it's just still future, but I don't know really anybody where you're talking about it's the HOA's responsibility. I don't know too many people that actually have that type of our piece of property is, but I don't know too many people that actually have a detention pond
There's
in
more than
their
you think.
yard.
There are more.
There's one on,
It's on the, usually on
There's
the,
a solution, there's an easy
there's
solution
one
to
on
this.
Copperfield.
There's an easy solution to this, and you guys tell me if I get this wrong.
Bradshaw.
But we're talking about future development here.
Yeah.
Big-
it's all-
We could simply have a
Moving
provision
forward.
that says, in a planned development, all of the common stormwater infrastructure must be commonly owned. Instead of saying, well, we're going to let this homeowner own this catch basin, and this homeowner's gonna own this swale, and these homeowners collectively are gonna own this detention pond. We can simply make it a provision that all of those things, if they're all tied to a development plan,
Right.
have to be commonly owned.
Is it not already a provision in planning and zoning?
No.
So,
Planning and
just,
zoning could allow one homeowner to get stuck with,
They already are. In the old developments, they already
I know
are.
the old developments, but right now, if a new developer went into planning and zoning, they would allow one homeowner to be stuck with one of these.
Till we
The point is, there is no language that really says who's responsible for what. They do things like say, there's a drainage easement, but they don't ever define who's responsible for it. So common ownership isn't, and maintenance responsibility isn't something that's being considered accurately right now. Am I?
two quick things. Mike brought to my attention that sometimes a detention basin may be on not just an open space property, but also on a private property, a homeowner's piece, so that they can meet certain setbacks or requirements. The second part is, when you're saying common ownership, are you talking about common ownership of a swale in an easement across a single piece of property, as well as a detention basin?
That'd be a
For futuristic.
complex deed.
Well, maybe ownership isn't the right word, but maintenance responsibility.
Responsibility.
Yeah.
Common maintenance.
Common maintenance of
Responsibility.
the easement. In other words, the easement is, well, I'm not sure what the appropriate legal mechanism is, but I believe there would be a way of saying for all future developments, you don't tie any stormwater feature that benefits multiple houses
To one person.
to one particular house. Now,
That-
if you can prove this is solely a feature for the benefit of this one house, then I think it makes sense to make them solely responsible.
That
for it.
can, that
Yeah,
can certainly
that
be
makes
handled
sense.
through planning and zoning in the
Yes.
design.
Can we,
That answer your-
can we anticipate situations where, even in the Lowe's example of the dry drainage basins there, under any of the scenarios you've discussed, what happens if there's a catastrophic failure of that best management practice?
On a commercial lot or on a residential?
Yeah, just pick the worst-case scenario. which
Well,
could
in
happen.
both scenarios, if it's a catastrophic fail, it needs to be repaired. So it goes back to whoever's responsible.
Which makes this question pretty important. It's not a casual question we're answering.
Right.
I keep worrying that we're fundamentally changing the relationship between the city and her citizens
Yeah.
in ways that most people are not going to be happy with.
So then are you suggesting then that the city take on a bigger level of responsibility, or larger level of responsibility?
And that's not financially feasible. It's classic between a rock and a hard place. I suspect that because it's what we understand the most and what we have structures in place to deal with the most, we're probably going to land on the individual or homeowners association just to begin this process. But even though I recognize that might be our conclusion, I just want us to understand all of the potential outcomes of that
I
conclusion.
think so.
Ideally, David, if we had a funding mechanism that could address this, it would best be handled in a comprehensive fashion by the city. But that's an incredible amount of money that would make us be in the stormwater business and no other business. So we're looking for something that lets us continue to serve our citizens. I'm sorry, I don't have a great recommendation yet, but my sense is the more we've kicked this around internally and listening to your all's questions, that we may very well end up with the individual being responsible, with the city inspecting,
Yeah.
maintaining, and forcing that action to be done. I think along with that, we'll need some very vigorous expectations with homeowners associations and what we want planning and zoning to work with us to make real going into the future. Just to give us any mechanism that gives us a hope at solving the more common problems. And we know that at some point, very soon, we've got to come back to you all with an ordinance to consider. And if we don't understand the consequences, we'll bring you the wrong ordinance.
This, who's responsible for what is a question that Kyle and I have been having
2 years,
2 years, almost from the day that I got here, and
the day you got here.
the day I got here, and the thing is, we still don't have an answer. What we have now is the EPA forcing us to determine on paper the answer to that question, which is what we've been wanting we've been wanting this since we got here, but
I
now
think
the
back
EPA is
further
saying
than that. I
you
went
do
to all
it.
of those classes when Eric was here.
Yeah, I was gonna say, Eric and I talked about it many times.
I mean, it's been ongoing, knowing that this was gonna happen.
David?
I don't really know all the questions. I mean, if they were all lined out for us, 1 through whatever, maybe we could go through them and answer them, saying this is the city's responsibility, this is the homeowner's responsibility, this is the city. Is it that clear and concise, or is it?
Well, it depends on how deep into the minutia you want to get. I mean, there's gray areas and then there's gray areas. you know,
But what's black and white? What can we do? David's question is good.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
what we need. What can we do? I mean, we're talking, I think we're probably gonna end up, property owners are gonna have some responsibility, and we're gonna take some responsibility, but can we not define
Sure.
what those, but we need your brain to tell us where it stops at simple maintenance, becomes something more complex that the city needs to come into. So I think what David's saying, having some black and white, we can say yes, 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 or no, no, no on that, would be good.
okay.
I think if you want black and white, you go through each BMP and you say, we're responsible for doing these maintenance items, you're responsible for doing these maintenance items.
The only limitation by doing that is BMPs often change. And what? And subtract. You know, one day a BMP is a feasible option that the EPA endorses, and one day it's not.
Well, it's kind of like FHA guidelines. Same thing.
It does make it more difficult potentially for us to change those BMPs in the future.
Right. My personal recommendation would be a clearly defined overall strategy for all of them. And I've read a lot of ordinances over the past couple days, and some of them explain it quite well.
Could you send some of those ordinances to us?
Absolutely.
And let us, some that you really think are what we're looking at or what we should be looking at?
Right.
So we can have an idea of how they lay out?
Like some of them, for example, mowing, obviously. Say you have a swale on your property, removing tree limbs or preventing trees from growing in the swale.
Not putting fences there.
Not putting fences there.
Not
Clean up the
throwing
trash that
in it.
runs
throwing
through.
trash,
runs
picking
Cleaning
down
the
up
through
trash
trash.
out.
thing, yeah.
Cleaning
Exactly.
the trash out.
You know, that kind of, not pushing all of your grass clippings over there or your leaves. You know, those kind of things.
David, you had another point.
Well, you know, I've often said or asked maybe, what are other communities doing? And I know we talked a little bit about that at the last meeting. And other states might be much further along than Kentucky is. I don't know. I suspect that,
Very.
like Florida, for example. And I use Sarasota as an, you know, I've mentioned Sarasota. What are they doing? What's Sarasota doing? What's their ordinance look like? You know, I mean, they're very progressive as it relates to issues like this.
Oh, true, and part of that's because they have different requirements than we do.
Yeah.
Their requirements, they're, I don't know, 5, 10, 15 years ahead of us permit-wise as a state.
Okay.
So their requirements are way farther down the line than ours
Okay.
are.
But know that these ideas that we're bringing you, these all come from other people's ordinances, and
Yeah.
we're just stealing from their ideas and laying them out for you.
I know.
Correct.
Well, I go back to what Karen kind of emphasized, and if for me, I like to see things and a little more tangible and be able to understand the question and be able to answer that one specifically anyway.
Okay.
What I do worry a little bit about is making a decision that's going to adversely impact a home. I mean, I think we're all concerned about that, and I can hear the mayor saying the same thing. It's changing the relationship that we have with our citizens.
The way I've read most of them, it's general lawn care maintenance. I mean, what you would normally do on your piece of property.
That's what Danville's looked like, I think it was for the.
Count, following up on David's suggestion about a list of questions, and I understand that eventually we need to get to general specifications that apply across the board. But couldn't that process help us get to that standard
Sure.
that we would then apply to all of our BMPs?
Yeah, either that or bringing you a bunch of ways different municipalities have stated that responsibility. You know, both ways would work, certainly.
I think we've adequately made the point that this is complicated and that there are consequences to each of these actions. But I do think now we do need, all these questions seem to flow back to what are other folks doing that we can consider and give it a thumbs up or thumbs down, and does it fit what we want for Georgetown? Is that kind of what you already
Yeah, I
did?
think so. Yeah.
Mike, are we on a reasonable path with that conversation?
Just like we could bring some case study examples and kind of walk you through what maybe some benchmark communities are doing, and you can see firsthand how how that line divides responsibility for different tasks.
I think if looking to a future council meeting, 6 months, a year and a half down the road, when we're responding to some citizens who are not happy with our new approach to stormwater, we're going to want to know that we've thought through this just as carefully as we can and considered all the possible outcomes. Because those days are going to come. Like I assume all the communities you've worked in, I'm going to guess this isn't smooth sledding.
This is, what you all are experiencing here is not unlike any other community that's had to face the same decision.
And we're doing it in a room that's virtually empty. Take this conversation and put it on steroids with a room full of angry citizens, and that's what I want us to make sure that we've anticipated.
You know, if you were doing this, the angry citizen part is not as concerning right now. Maybe I'm not seeing the picture that you're seeing. If we were retrofitting this on everybody, I see the city packed out to the street being angry.
The new
But for the
ones.
fact that right now, we're dealing with new development and new commercial that when they go into the future, that they're gonna have to be responsible for this and know this. I don't see it, I see it being, maybe they're perturbed about it, but I don't see them being as angry as if we were trying to retrofit the whole county or the whole community. Now, when that happens, they're gonna be storming City Hall. And I'm
Pitchforks and torches.
That's right. But being for the future, I don't see it as bad, see our strong education, because first of all, if we're talking about this, maybe the subdivision that Mark and I are in, because they're doing some new construction currently, it's gonna affect that, which affects some of the people that are already there. But the brand new subdivisions, it's all new when they go into it. I mean, it's all new, it's all a part of it when they're buying into it, developing it and all that.
I agree with your point.
So
It's less complex
but I
looking
think
forward.
the future is,
But when they make us go back
we're
and
in trouble.
that's when it's gonna be a different.
Mark, did you have a point?
Let's touch on Karen's point then. I mean, I know we're talking about the future tonight, but realistically, is there somewhere down the road that we're going to have to come back and talk about those subdivisions?
5, 10 years.
Whether it's residential or commercial that are already there? Is that something realistically that you think is going to happen in the future?
I would say yes.
I think.
Okay.
Go ahead, Mark. I'm
I guess my concern would then be is that we have to be consistent in the way, because if we're going to have to come back and address what's already there, shouldn't we be whatever we're doing moving forward,
Has to go.
be consistent with what we're looking at down the road, whether it's this council or, obviously we can't bind a future council, but we also need to keep that in mind, what's going to happen down the road.
One of the few benefits that we have going for us is the fact that I don't think we have to be consistent. The path, and Mike, you can correct me on this, or Kyle, you can correct me on this. The way we assign responsibility for post-construction stuff, if we start on one path today, if later we're faced with doing post-construction maintenance on existing subdivisions or existing commercial buildings, I think we have the flexibility to completely change our path and our funding mechanism. So I don't think I can appreciate not confusing citizens by being consistent, but if we ever have to look historically at this, it's going to be such a complete game changer that we're going to want to revisit the way we've decided to fund it.
Well,
and
it
deal with
would
it.
be different. If we have to retrofit it, the difference will be we're putting the future burden on the current taxpayer, but not a whole lot. We're putting it on the HOAs and the property owners, and they're taking the biggest part of the burden now as we move forward. But flip side of it, if we have to retrofit it, then we will have to put a tax on it, and then all of that's out the window and you start all over again, because it would be wrong for the HOA to be doing it and everybody paying a tax when they're paying it through the HOAs. So then you really have to go back. I think you could almost do this for the next 5-6 years without having a impact fee of any kind to go on top of it and be able to handle it. But if you retro it, you're going to have to put a fee on people, on the
For
taxpayers.
me, the question is, I'm not even sure that it's lawful to retroactively put those requirements on people without it being a constitutional taking of property. that people have to be compensated
Um,
for.
Well, I don't know, Lexington's doing, is not Lexington kind of doing that they are,
But they're, but
A fee that's been levied over the uniform.
That's why they're doing it, because
they're
fees are
taking
paying
the-
for it.
They're taking the responsibility and charging a fee for it.
Right.
That's different.
well, if we have to retro everybody into
We'll have to do
that's
the
what
same
we have
That's
to
what
thing.
you,
do.
I think
Yeah.
my point is there is no other alternative
There isn't.
for a retroactive. It has to be a city take it over.
And then you change what we're talking about potentially doing today, gets
So the
thrown out.
future, and everything just goes one fee on the whole
Starts
city.
all over.
Yeah.
Connie, do you have a question?
I was just thinking that futuristically, what we're trying to do, if we can work that out and lay the game plan from that and learn
Right.
from that, that when we do have to do others, at least we'll meet that criteria that the state or whoever EPA has set up before us, that if we just move forward with a plan, do what David was talking about, and, yes, no, and get it out there, and at least kind of see how it's going to work through planning and zoning, and then it'll give us an idea if we do have to go backwards, when we will go backwards.
Mike, you wanted to respond.
I was
to
just
some
going
of this.
to just going to say that I think we can look at this very carefully in terms of how you would roll out the going forward portion of this, and it may be able to be done in a very way that it would make it more seamless for you to go back and retroactively apply things on the back end for all the existing conditions. And there are things that you can do structurally in how you establish your ordinance and then establish that defining line of where those responsibilities lay for the property owner, for example, and for the city, where that can be accomplished. We're working in other states, and you mentioned other states. I think, Mayor, you may have mentioned that earlier. And one thing, for example, where cities are having to go back and retroactively bring in other communities where their infrastructure has been under an HOA, for example, and it has fallen into a serious state of disrepair, they've basically they've had an approach where they've agreed with the HOAs to kind of incorporate those into the public realm like the properties going forward, but first bringing it up to a standard that they would be willing to accept, through some assessments that might be levied on those HOAs where those responsibilities existed. So there's a host of different ways that you could look at this, holistically for, ahead, and then historically in the rearview mirror for properties that have previously developed. But I think the key is, defining how you want your program to go to operate going forward, and then do that in a way that you can easily and seamlessly integrate the historical issues on the back end whenever you decide, if you decide to do that.
I think one other question I have, though, I would like to ask is that, let's futuristically moving forward, if you have people like Walmart and Kroger and different commercial properties like that do pay annually or monthly to have theirs maintained, can they be excluded as far as charging them or anything, but making them make sure that they give us information or paper documents saying that they are having that done? Do you understand what I'm trying to say?
Not for what they would future build. For what they currently have doesn't matter, but if they add on to it, then they would be under new regulations.
But if they're taking care of all of the maintenance requirements,
That's
then
what I'm
theoretically, all they should have to do is fill out a form,
Then they're
or have
covered.
us come and do the inspection that says,
This is
everything looks
right.
great, and that's the end of their responsibility as far
Because
as
they're
to the
already
city.
doing
Doing
it.
what
Because
they're
they're
supposed to
already
be
doing
doing.
it.
So I think that's important.
And Mark, I think Mike answered your question better than I did.
But yeah, it was.
Karen, one thing you said about us giving the property owners more responsibility with the Danville model is what you were looking at?
Yeah.
We're actually taking more of the responsibility onto the city. We're taking a
Well-
heavier, more expensive
They're
retrofit, or not retrofit, wrong word, but replacement of like head walls and pipes.
They're doing basic maintenance.
Correct. So in that situation, we're taking more of the responsibility than the residents.
Yes.
Okay.
That is my intent.
Just wanted to clarify.
Yes, that is my intent.
And I don't want to, I'm not trying to force this conversation. If you guys want more information, we'll get you more information. But I think that is the basic model that exists out there. Either the city's doing it all, the homeowner's doing it all, or we're splitting it somewhere. And from the examples that we've looked at, there aren't really, the line doesn't get really drawn much of anywhere else except you all are doing the mowing and the sweeping and the raking, and we're doing everything else. I mean, do we?
Well, Hopkinsville, Nicholasville, Owensboro, and Richmond all use property owner.
Well, sure. They all say they're responsible for everything.
Correct.
But when there's a sharing,
Yes.
which is what we're all, I kind of hear that conversation
Yeah, I like the
leaning.
sharing
The
idea.
sharing.
Hybrid.
Is there really much of a reason to debate where that line needs to be drawn when there seems to be a natural dividing place?
Well, I think like David said, maybe if we could see that, I mean, I just read what the Danville part of it was, so if we could actually see
What
kinda
ours
what
might
those
look like and see how,
responsibilities- which is maybe telling you to do an ordinance, I guess, but
yeah, that's what it is.
I mean, if
but
we're
if we could
getting,
see those responsibilities or where we're gonna divide them out.
if we're getting down to that point and where we can go ahead and move forward on the rest of the ordinance stuff, we can bring you an ordinance that says, all right, here's how we split it out, and then we can tweak from that point forward. What we're really hoping to get tonight is a general sense so that we can get everything else. You saw with the lines where everything has to go. All that has to be tied together legally, and that's going to be a lot of work. And if we need to get that done by March 31st, we need to get started on that. We can be thinking about where that line gets drawn and give you all some better ideas about how visually you start to draw that line and how we put it in language. But if what we're hearing is we like the shared idea.
That was the
Another
hybrid.
special-
The hybrid.
The hybrid,
That's
that's
what
the
we
hybrid.
talked
Weeks from
about
tonight.
Yeah.
initially.
And what I hear the council saying is we probably are moving toward a shared model with the homeowner or the owner having basic maintenance,
Right.
extraordinary maintenance, or more expensive maintenance, maybe the cities. But I also hear the council saying, we just don't want to take something off the shelf. We want a customized version, and we want to go through the list and decide version.
See what we can and can't do.
What works?
Right.
What doesn't.
Which fits our sensitivities as a local community, since we know our citizens.
Right.
Strand can get a list together and we can email it to you like a worksheet. You just check it off and send it back to me.
That'd be good.
That
That'd
work?
help. That'd help a lot.
Okay, we'll do that.
Mayor,
Yes, sir.
I'm gonna probably be the lone wolf here, but I don't think we should do a shared responsibility. I think we're looking at the future, we're looking at future property owners. I think if we have a properly structured vehicle through planning and zoning, we can meet the requirement that's before us today in a property owner, scenario. I mean, these homeowner associations can build in the cost of repairing, replacing these BMPs. Businesses can do that, and we're looking in the future. We're not talking about retrofitting. I think a vehicle in planning and zoning can get this done, and we can meet that requirement. To me, it seems simpler than what we're making it out to be right now, because we're trying to mix in a little bit of the retrofitting in our future plan, and that's not what's before us right now. At least that's not what I see.
This is not, you're right. We're only looking prospective.
And once we've decided on, let's assume we chose the shared model and we took all the major the maintenance responsibilities or replacement responsibilities, then we got to start talking about where we're going to find the money to do it all.
Yeah, exactly. That's a tough question.
I have another quick question.
Yeah.
I've heard
The
various
elephant in the room.
talks about commercial and residential, but are you all considering us having any part in commercial? I felt like I heard that a couple times. I just want to make sure I was clear on what.
Well, most of them, the commercials that are big, like Walmart, they're gonna have it set in right where there's not a whole lot anyway. Now, some of these smaller, I don't know.
In between.
None of the examples that we looked at
Correct.
had
Right.
cities doing commercial
Right.
responsibilities.
I had just heard some, I don't know if it was mixing up words or not, but,
It was mixed up words.
okay. Thank you.
Karen, did you do
I
that?
think we're clear on that. I
Okay.
don't want to discount Chuck's question about.
Yes.
Because I'm not sure we have a consensus. We're working toward one, but maybe we need to, I don't know, I just don't want to short circuit the conversation.
Well, with Chuck, explain your theory just a little bit more, if you don't mind.
What do you mean theory?
Well, what you said, explain.
Well, I mean, I'm looking forward, and the new property owners are gonna be coming in and the planning and zoning, and we can have a vehicle in planning and zoning that spells all this out. where the city doesn't have to jump in and take care of everything. I
So
mean,
you're saying let all the new
Let the
homeowners
PG.
bear the cost of,
I'm a firm believer in,
You know.
in whoever uses a facility, okay, pays for that facility. So if you have a development that has 3 retention ponds, the owners in that development are responsible for the cost of those 3 retention ponds. And they need to build it into their homeowner association.
I guess one question was if they don't have a homeowners association,
Well, we
We were
can
talking about maybe-
require
They
that
have
through
one,
the
we
planning and
require-
zoning.
Futuristic.
and you can
Yeah.
require that on.
Well, like I said, the end result is I don't think you're gonna require that they make an HOA,
They
but that's
require the
what
developer to provide a
Yeah.
vehicle to fund the maintenance of that.
and he is going to set up an HOA because that's really his only
Right,
legal
yeah.
mechanism.
Yeah,
for
to
doing
get the
so.
development. through.
Yes.
He'll have
So
to
if you
set
do
up-
it all in the beginning and lay it out there, it fixes our problem and satisfies its need.
Those,
Well, I think, and it's still kind of what we've said with this, even with the shared part of it, that, all right, if an HOA, take an HOA, take it out of a personal property, but if you take an HOA and they have the ponds, they set them up like they're supposed to set up and everything, it's years, what it usually happens that there's negative comes along, is years later when the developer is no longer around and all that, and then that's when we run into the problem, and it's not gonna be in the next few
I
years.
think that's it.
No, I-
Problem.
That's really it. I think, because if the developer goes bankrupt or disappears, then you're right, the problem that we're stuck with. I think that's always the hard thing.
but when you're talking about this shared responsibility, what you're saying is take the sediment pond. Let's pretend that's a residential
Right.
sediment dry
Bradford.
basin. Bradford. Let's pretend it's Bradford. They've got dry basins there. Is that the homeowners association or the residents are going to be responsible for mowing that and making sure it's seeded,
Which they are currently doing.
which they are currently doing. But when it comes time to have that thing dredged in 5 years, the city's got to do it at its own cost.
I don't think so. I think the homeowner should.
Well, and that's where
Not the
the
homeowner,
that
but the
would be-
homeowners association.
then that would be not the shared the shared responsibility plan is, and when the concrete inlet is cracked and has to be repaired, the city does that. That's the shared model. Your model is the property owner model, whereas when the pond has to be dredged, the property owner, the HOA, has to do that. So
It
the
really
shared
makes
model,
sense.
the
The
shared model
people who are
means
using
the-
it would provide the funding to do that through their homeowner association.
I'm just trying to make sure we get we understand what we say when we say homeowner model, or the property owner model, the city model, and the hybrid model. I want to make sure everybody understands what it is that we're.
How hard is it on you
I know, it's gonna
to
cost money,
do
you gotta hire
examples, or Kyle, to do examples of the three ways for us, and then let us visibly, or be able to see it laid out that way?
3 actual ordinance examples.
That kind of fits, the shared and kind of fits what Chuck is talking about. Can you do something like that so we can kind of see?
Can we go to other communities and show you what?
Yeah. it's fine.
Okay.
You talking about like in the van?
Road trip.
You really want to sit in the back of the van with me again?
Well, I kind of see what Chuck's saying moving forward.
Yes.
All right. The biggest, and here's what I've said before as well. Sometimes we don't know what we don't know.
Right.
And we all know that we've had problems with HOAs.
Yes.
I mean, that happens. And I guess in the perfect world, if all the HOAs were sound and strong and healthy and had good management, had good reserves or revenue, to me that does seem like the best approach as well. I guess I just worry about what happens when we run into a situation where maybe they're not in that capacity, when they're not strong, they don't have the money, they don't have.
Giving it
That's
that example.
That was my point about drawing that big arrow from enforcement to maintenance.
Right.
Because that's where you end up anyway. If you say they're responsible for it and they fail to do it, it comes back to us anyway. It has to get done. The maintenance has to get done, or
You know,
it
EPA
floods.
don't care who owns it. It's
But-
just our responsibility as the city
But he
governing
said-
body to
Enforce
fix
it
it.
or do
But
it.
but he said that if that happened, that there would be something in the ordinance or in the contract that we could go back and we could do a special assessment in order to gain that money to take care of it because it was given to them in the first place. Is that not what you said?
That's where you provide the funding. Instead of the HOA providing the funding, you provide it to a special assessment.
If they fail,
On the properties
If it's
for
fair.
that purpose.
it's a special assessment for stormwater utility.
You talking about across
No,
the
but-
board costs?
No,
No, just for
Just
that
for the
development,
HOA.
just for the property that benefits from that BMP that we're talking
we're
about.
only talking future. That they say, when and if we ever have to
Yeah.
go backwards, we can change it.
All right, let me throw out another scenario,
You
okay?
Start
Is
at.
that all right, Mayor, if I throw out something just
Please,
while we're
do.
thinking about it? I mean, as we all know, in 2007, 8, there were a lot of developers and a lot of developments that didn't make it. Let's say that there is a project that gets going and they've got a bunch of lots and they've sold 15 lots and they've got 100 other lots to sell, and they can't sell them. Then who's funding that HOA? The developer's gone bankrupt. He's left the property. I guess the bank's taking it back over at that time. But are they funding the HOA? I mean, realistically, I don't know.
They
Why
are
couldn't
if there's a
the bank?
covenant in place that says whoever owns it is responsible for its maintenance.
Exactly.
Where does the covenant? Go ahead, Mayor.
I was just going to say, in the banking world, you just made commercial development loans really difficult to get. I mean, you've affected people's ability to do business
Right.
under that scenario. This is,
So they don't want to take a chance
Yeah,
of being
take a
stuck
chance
with,
on that.
yeah,
With those fees, if there's.
for how long?
If they're not successful.
forever.
Well, just like the fire hydrants.
We don't have that issue resolved.
I know,
We've been talking about that for 20 years.
I know. But I
Fire hydrants
think
tonight.
we gotta have
Before we get-
something in place.
Well,
and
I think-
something to work with.
Well, I think we said we're gonna get 3 scenarios. Let us look at it.
Yeah.
See what we think will retrofit us the best.
Yeah, and we're willing to bring back a list of what other cities are doing and go through a process of where it might fall in or out. But the prospect of drafting 3 different ordinances is not reasonable. We need to come to
Yeah.
some conclusions
Yeah.
before we ask anyone to draft 3 different
Yeah,
ordinances that are
yeah,
highly
exactly.
complex and difficult to do.
Yeah.
But if you do a shared version, you're gonna have to come up with some type of revenue to pay for it.
Or pay for it out of your general fund.
So
like
why not
Bowling
just make
Green
the
does.
people who are benefiting, the property owners who are benefiting from that, pay for it in the beginning?
Let me add on, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Go ahead,
Brad, I
I'm-
apologize. Let me add on to his question now. In this shared approach, with the anticipated growth that we're expecting over the next 20 to 25 years, do we have any idea at this point, if we take the shared approach, how much money, we don't know that.
You can't know. You can't know.
It's
Scary.
got to be a pretty
Yeah.
big chunk of money, though, wouldn't you
It's
agree?
got to be a very large number.
In the,
It's an unknown that's hard to quantify.
that we would have to set aside each year. Correct? But it probably at least $500,000, if not more.
Well, I will share this with you. I mean, this may not be the right way of approaching it, because it's going about it from the complete opposite direction, but there was a survey in one of your Western Kentucky Stormwater Utility Survey from 2013, and they took, looks like 11 Kentucky cities that have stormwater utility fees and looked at how much revenue they were bringing in. Now, and the stormwater utility fee is supposed to be tied to what it costs to do the maintenance. And for example, Louisville's bringing in $17 million a year. I mean, it's hard to compare Louisville, but look at someone like Hopkinsville. Their population is almost right where we are, and they're bringing in $1.1 million a year to pay for stormwater costs.
And the property owner is responsible for maintenance.
And the property owner is responsible for it.
Wow.
I just catch that
Crazy.
part, but a comparable one is Oldham County. They're 40,000, and they're bringing in 750,000 revenue for stormwater. I'm not trying to suggest anything by that. I'm just trying to say there are formulas for saying if you have this much impervious surface, this is how much it could cost.
Right.
A range.
You have to remember the utility is not just for a specific area or just going forward. That's for the entire community.
It's really not possible to come up with that cost in any kind of reasonable sense. Even the ones that have the stormwater utility fees have to constantly think about readjusting it to meet what the true demands are, up or down.
You know, and that fee doesn't just pay for maintenance of these post-construction. I mean, it pays for street sweeping, pays for pipe cleanouts, inspections, it pays for a lot of different things. But this is just one small part of the pie that we're talking about tonight.
And keep in mind that regardless of how we allocate these responsibilities, we can never leave the responsibility of inspecting these properties and us being responsible for the maintenance and the necessary improvements being made. We have to, the owner has to make it happen, or we have to cause it to happen.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's a cost. We're already trying to calculate the impact of simply the inspection mechanism, and the things that we know we're going to have to do that are above and beyond what we've done in the past for the coming budget year. Our engineering costs are going to increase, regardless of the decision we make on how to allocate these costs. We're looking at increased operational cost. So the question I'm trying to work through for the benefit of the council is which model is most attractive and how we can make the decision of which model is most attractive. Chuck's made good points. Others have made equally valid points. But we can't have both. We've got to pick a direction and go that way. Will the additional information that Kyle and Andrew have discussed with you help the council make that decision?
I still lean towards the shared only because, not because I don't think Chuck's right, but only because we've had so much negative experience in the community with HOAs. And you all know that's been on the council the longest, how much we have fought HOAs over and over and over and over and over. So I'm afraid it's gonna fall back on us anyway.
But we can move into a receivership on the HOA if it doesn't
Right.
function.
I don't think that the property owner itself solution is viable without some reform to the HOA idea. I think that there's a possibility that we could tweak that. We're sort of in uncharted territory on that idea, though. And that's a very, very good point. Is if you're, because that's the model we're under right now for so many things, and it fails. Because we have no way of saying to the homeowners association, exist or else.
Right.
Well, because you don't have that receivership mechanism in place
Right.
that you go in. Well, that's another part in the planning and zoning thing that you can do.
It is. I think under either scenario we choose, we're going to have to be much stronger with our expectations of homeowners associations and the Planning and Zoning Commission in how they deal with HOAs.
Yep.
Either way, that's a given, or this won't work.
You're right.
Mayor, you've made some valid points, as Mr. Lesby has as well, but I'll be honest, I'm kind of leaning with Mr. Bradley on this one at this point. I remain open-minded on it, but I'm kind of leaning in that direction as well.
Moving forward.
Moving forward.
That's what we have to deal with right now, right?
Yes, ma'am. That's all we have to work with through the end of March. That's all we have to do.
That's the simplest. And you said from the very beginning, it can be changed. Don't make it any harder than you have to.
Bottom line is, the citizens have to pay for this unfunded mandate, which is what this is.
This is
Citizens have to pay for
the
it either
truest
with taxes
unfunded.
or with fees.
Yeah.
You know, we can't stand up to the federal government and say, we're not gonna do this, can we, Kyle?
You can do base stamp.
I'm not
I
gonna
mean,
do
if
it.
it was me by myself, I would do that, okay?
Well, you can still say it, Chuck, but I don't know where they.
But they're gonna have to pay for it one way or the other, either taxes or fees to
Or
the
HOA.
homeowner association. They gotta pay for it one way. And I asked about the special tax assessment on new development. You know, you go in there and say, okay, you guys have this many BMPs, this is what it's gonna cost. We're gonna assess this extra tax assessment just for that development. We're not talking about past development
Right.
yet. We're talking about for that one in the future. Now, when I was mayor of North Middletown, we had to deal with that with the sidewalks.
Yeah.
people wanted sidewalks, and they said we could do a special assessment to build sidewalks on that street.
There are, look out in the county, the subdivisions do that very thing for road maintenance. They'll say, all right, we'll form a road taxing district. That's what they call it here. It's not really a special assessment. They say, we, these homeowners, are going to tax ourselves for the sole purpose of providing for our roads. It's just like an HOA, except it's government sponsored. Basically, I mean, that's basically what it is. It's the homeowners getting together and saying, we, these people, are going to do a special assessment on ourselves to pay for this.
So
We don't, what I'm trying to say is that you can look at that, but cities don't generally have that type of ability to, from a government down perspective, to say, we're going to tax this subdivision and this subdivision alone. That would probably require state legislation to authorize that. Otherwise, it would get thrown out. That's the only reason that counties can do it is because they have special legislation authorizing that.
I think Lexington can do that too. They have different tax rates for different
Well,
areas.
they do, but
That's why I asked about the class of
Based
city,
on level of
whether we're-
services.
based on level of services.
Yeah. I think that was part of the Urban County government
Is
legislation.
that not a level of service?
Lexington's formed under totally different law.
Well, that's why I asked about the class of city requirements or regulations in the beginning, to whether we could do that or not.
Yeah, the Urban County government statutes are completely different.
And even then, it's large areas. There's only really two areas. There's the inside and there's the outside. They don't go neighborhood by neighborhood on tax rates. They go outside the urban services area and inside the urban services area, and that's it.
I think I saw it different than that, but I may be wrong.
Can I ask another scenario question? We're all familiar with Gatewood. Gatewood was kind of, it was surrounded by development. Indian Hills was pretty much up above it. And when and let's say that we have another scenario similar to Gatewood, and they come in, they develop it, and we require them to put in adequate stormwater, retention, detention, whatever. But they're catching runoff from some place like Indian Hills, who doesn't have any. Is it fair? I mean, how do you get them to flip the bill for the?
You design it so that can't happen, correct?
Well, you design what?
You design, when a neighborhood comes in and when they submit the plan, you're supposed to, the standard is such that you're supposed to prove that the runoff from that area goes there and goes there alone.
I understand all that, but let's say that it comes in next door to somebody that doesn't meet the criteria right now.
Right.
And there's a lot of neighborhoods. Most of the city doesn't really
But that's
meet.
retro.
Right.
We're
I'm
talking,
not talking, no,
He
I'm
said
talking about a
one
new
like
piece
it.
of property next
I
to
get it.
something that's draining on.
I know, but when we're moving forward, we're already gonna have this mechanism in place because the federal government's making us do it.
Okay?
That-
But I'm not sure you're catching my point here. When that new development goes in, they're catching stormwater from whatever neighborhood's
From an old
existing.
neighborhood.
From the old neighborhood.
It doesn't have stormwater.
That's right. Is it fair for them to have to pay for the stormwater coming off the other property upstream?
I think at that point, that's an existing condition when you put the development in.
They're only required under the law to pay for the stormwater that on,
Well, wait a
What am I
minute.
trying to say?
No, because we're talking about cleaning out a storm drain. We're talking about
Well,
cleaning out
that's
a
true.
detention basin.
maintenance, it's still
And we're
maintenance.
talking about replacing a flume or some type of mechanism within there.
It's all.
And that's impacted by the neighborhood.
Yeah.
And this is where I go back to saying, sometimes we don't know what we don't know. You run into situations that you just, maybe you haven't thought about. And I'm not trying to make it
It's a new
complex or convoluted.
But it is complex.
It is complex.
The Indian Hills example is actually a good one. There's an older subdivision. I know we're not talking about retrofitting them, but they exist and they create runoff. And if you buy a parcel of ground adjacent to it, should you have to shoulder that burden for an entire neighborhood that's been there for 50 years and was built with no sidewalks or storm sewers?
No curbs, no gutters.
It pretty much
Just
just lay
houses.
out some streets and build houses.
And we went through that, talked about, we spent money going up there, putting those pipes in, trying to catch through Gatewood back down
We've done a lot
Oh,
of
yeah,
work in that
and
area.
it's still flooding down
Armstrong.
Armstrong, yeah.
Yeah.
And I do, Chuck, I like what you're saying. I like it the best. I'm just not sure in application if it would, if it could play out. That's what I guess I'm worried about. I mean, I like it.
Well, we don't have a crystal ball to see down the
I
road
know.
what's gonna happen.
Yeah.
So whenever there's a development goes in, there's tons of work that's done and negotiations back and forth and rules that they gotta go by. All that's gonna be discussed at that time.
Right.
So we will take those things on case-by-case basis in the future. We can't see what that's gonna happen right now. Right now, we need to satisfy that requirement. And the easiest, simplest way and cost-effective way to satisfy the requirement is to build a vehicle in planning and zoning, and we're done.
Just taking your thought and taking it a little farther, we're just talking about HOAs right now as an encompassing, island effect of different areas. In reality, the highest tier on the hierarchy of segregating stormwater is a watershed. So wherever this water falls within this boundary, it all goes to the creek. So all these people are contributing stormwater runoff to each other. That's the next hierarchy out there that I'm sure people have discussed before, but how do you go about leveraging costs across the entire watershed?
I don't see how you can. How can you make somebody in Indian Hills who doesn't have a HOA pay for it? Without
Well,
some type
I'm
of
saying the
tax?
HOA is not
Down
part of
that
it.
storm.
I'm saying instead of an HOA. If you're looking at how water affects other people, you have to look at a watershed.
That's why eventually, hopefully no time soon, you'll end up going back to having a stormwater assessment fee on, or just a flat tax.
She said that word
Yeah.
too, didn't she?
But that's eventually, right?
She said it 3 times tonight, right
Oh,
there.
Roads in the future
Fun.
lead to that
Karen
direction.
said the word tax.
Aaron wants a new tax.
All right.
He doesn't, Dan, no.
That's a new tax.
No.
Tax everybody.
It's not any different than Dominion Homes and Willow Lane. It didn't have a stormwater problem till Dominion went back up there and started building in that one area. It wasn't foreseen, but who ended up having to do it?
We chipped in.
We
We
did.
chipped in and helped. So you know what? We really don't have a crystal ball, but we're doing it forward.
Which even that scenario that you're talking about should have been caught in planning and zoning and should have
From the
never
beginning.
gotten back
But
to
they-
the beginning, but they didn't.
But we're talking future development. Planning
Which
and
could
zoning's
affect
got those
existing.
mechanisms in there
Yeah,
now because of what
existing
happened there,
things,
right?
They're working on revising their
They're
sub-regulations.
working on it still after 8 years of looking at that problem over there, but nevertheless.
Well,
I just want to reiterate 3 words that I said earlier. A properly structured vehicle in planning and zoning, okay?
And
There's a lot to that, properly
There is a
structured
lot to
vehicle.
that.
Yeah, there is.
Yeah,
And I
notification.
think we'll get them by March 31st.
Well,
There have been outstanding points made about these really complex issues, and every question has a flip side to it. And again, we want to bring you the ordinance that best fits what we believe our citizens want us to, the way we should approach this issue. And I think I'm surprised that we've gotten as far along in this conversation tonight as far as we have gotten. This is one of those topics where you can flounder for a long time and make no progress, and we've actually moved this ball pretty far down the court tonight. I'm willing to, we can't take a vote tonight. I don't even think it's right to take a straw poll. I just don't think any of that's appropriate. We're not here for that purpose. We can give you additional information if you think it will help you come to a consensus. We're probably gonna need a specially called council meeting, not a workshop, but a called council meeting with this one agenda item where we can let you have additional information, kick these same questions around some more, and then get to the point where we actually take a vote on which direction the council would like to proceed under. Then we can ask Andrew to craft one ordinance that matches the desire of the council and move forward with it. Is that a reasonable approach to everyone?
Is there any way, Mayor, that it can be done on the 9th? With getting information on our regular called council meeting?
What if I get you as much information as I can tomorrow, and then hopefully hear back from you all within a day or two? I doubt we'll be able to draft the ordinance for first reading by then, but at least we'll be able to have the discussion on the 9th meeting.
We can have a discussion, Kyle, but we can't even take a poll via email. if it's
No, I'm
in a
not
meeting.
saying that. I'm
Okay.
saying just an individual
Worst comes
response.
down to worst, we have another
Me.
special,
Meeting.
2 weeks tonight or something.
That'd be fine.
I mean, I just soon do that instead of, I just soon try to keep our council meeting. If we have to
Council.
come back another special night here, call it a council meeting that night if you like, that's fine, but we could have a called meeting 2 weeks from the night.
Kyle and I are both off the week of the 16th.
That's
just
all
so
right, we
you
don't
all
need
know.
you all anyway.
Yeah.
So that won't work, Tom.
Yeah,
Did we mention
no.
vacations were canceled?
Oh, yeah, that's
Yeah,
right.
right.
Hey, till we get the flood taken care of.
We want him
I'll be
here.
out of town next week myself.
So what if I just get the information, we discuss it on Monday?
That's fine.
And then at that point, we'll start drafting the
It'll
ordinance.
make your other agendas small.
Well, all right, I can live with that. We have a council meeting, a regularly scheduled council meeting on this coming Monday night. We can add this as an agenda item. And if, like I told you when we first started this conversation, that there's a March 31st deadline out there for us to get this ordinance passed. But you're the city council. If you're not ready to take that vote by the 31st, then we'll deal with those consequences. We're acting in as good faith as we can. And if we can get it done in a timely fashion, that's wonderful. If you all need a little more time to mull over such a critically important issue, then we'll take the time we need and assume that because we're acting in good faith, that we'll have that latitude. Now, I've got several people here who are going to advise me not to do that, but I think you all have to have that latitude.
But we have another Monday on the
Yeah.
31st.
Yeah.
The 30th is a
We-
Monday, if I'm not
we
mistaken.
could do
so-
that.
We'll send the
Yeah.
Division of Water
Won't be
this
here?
video of this
Okay.
council meeting that shows that we're
Cancel it?
We're
not
into
just
it.
ignoring, we're not just ignoring our responsibilities. We won't have it by the 31st, but look, we're talking about it. I think that's what they really care about at this point. We're already, in the interest of full disclosure, we're already 24 months past the deadline for when we're supposed to have this thing in
What do you
place.
think?
We're just coming up to the end of our permit period. It's another hard and fast deadline, but we're already pushing it. I mean,
The
we've already.
reflection on their faces to look like they're as excited about that as you
No.
I've asked Mike this question directly, and he'd prefer not to answer it.
Well, I don't blame him.
He's not going to answer it on the record, but let's come back to this question a week from tonight, at our regular scheduled council meeting. You'll see it on your agenda. Kyle, whatever information you can cover us up with, please do so.
So sorry to cut you off.
No, go ahead.
We're looking for an ordinance about property owner, an ordinance for shared, and do you care to see the ordinance for city maintains everything? Okay. And then include with the shared, I'll put a list of items that you can check off if you decide that's the way you want to go. Is there any other information you all think you might need?
Yes, sir, David.
I'd kind of like to hear from planning and zoning
I was
directly.
just getting ready to say, planning and zoning needs to be at this next council meeting.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely,
I
without a
thought maybe
doubt.
they might be here
And
tonight.
see what they think on some of these
Yeah, what
ideas
their
that we're
views.
looking
They had
at.
a
So what
Board of
works.
Adjustments meeting tonight, so a lot of the staff's tied up in that
Gotcha.
meeting. In fact, they had to move it from our chambers somewhere else because we're here.
Can I add something else?
Yes,
I know
sir.
you guys are tired of hearing from me tonight.
No, you
No.
you go right on.
One of the things that I see with the problem with the shared is it's gonna head us into having that global tax that Karen wants.
That is.
But-
I will agree with you. That gets away from the global tax.
But really,
Did you get that?
if we go the shared method, we're gonna have to have a way to pay for it, and then we're gonna be heading into talking about revenue and a tax to pay for it.
Well, the only
And
time
I
we
can't
should,
support any type of tax. So I'm trying to find a way to keep from doing that. And I think staying away from the shared is the best way to do that.
Maybe with Chuck's, maybe the difference is I just don't have the confidence in either planning and zoning or in the homeowners association to keep it from coming back on us anyway.
Well, that's what I said at the beginning of the meeting. The homeowner association should be step up front to help cover a majority of this, so.
There's no reason for the HOA not to work, because I can tell you there are several here that do,
Right.
and they're run very efficiently.
And there's several that, I mean, I think ours does pretty good, but there's several of them that don't as well, so, but.
Well, with this, with something like this, they're being responsible for, we're talking about,
They'll go ahead.
they know they're gonna have to work.
Right.
They
Or the
know
city
they're
may
gonna have to
step
do
in and
this.
take it over, they might work harder at making it
Right,
work.
right.
That's
I
right.
think
Mark?
education and outreach go a long way towards
Sure.
getting them established correctly in the first place. And one thing that we don't have right now is, that you could have, is that HOA doesn't have to be established when the final development plan is approved. They don't even have to prove that. But I've seen cities that say, before we will approve your subdivision development plan, you have to show us here, the board, proof of filing with the Secretary of State, all the things that are inherent in forming an HOA, and proving that first. There are things that we can do to really beef up
That's right.
HOAs. And I think we need to do those things anyway,
Yeah, that's
regardless of what we do
I
here.
agree.
Mark?
I don't have a calendar in front of me. The second meeting this month, is that the 30th? Did I hear Marvin earlier?
No, the second meeting would
23rd.
be the 23rd, then we have
Yeah.
it, but
Regular schedule.
spring break is the following week, if I'm not mistaken, so
Yeah.
there'll be some people out of town.
It's the 9th and the 23rd this
If there's
month.
any way possible, and I don't want anybody to make special work around my schedule, but if there's any way we can avoid that 30th,
We're not, I don't think we are.
that would be, I'm just one person, but that would be great if that's possible.
If we come to consensus on the 9th, or we'll have a vote on the 9th, and we'll have a direction on the 9th, we could even, there are other opportunities for special called meetings
Yeah.
to get the 2 readings in.
We'll have the 23rd anyway.
If we're a week late on voting on this ordinance, I'm telling you, that's not.
No comment.
What, they gonna do, shut our water off?
I mean, yeah, what are they gonna do, shut her?
I would not recommend,
Doing that.
Well,
Well, if we have a vote on the Monday night, we could, you can have an earlier meeting and
if we've had a first reading by the deadline, are they really gonna come cracking down on us? I mean, that's,
they're not
Well,
gonna answer the
nobody,
question, are you?
nobody's going to answer that question, but we're going to do our business in the most business-like fashion we can, and we're going to do the public's business correctly.
Right.
And council will have adequate time to deliberate this.
I hate to say it, but I'm leaning toward Chuck now, so.
They could, yeah, they could do
How many cities don't have a plan at all?
Yeah, they could.
how many cities don't have a
Don't have a
plan?
plan at all. Have not even addressed this.
I couldn't tell you off the top of my head.
Percentage-wise, guess.
Yeah,
We
but
talk
they might
about-
not, they're,
we talked
no.
about, there are
Back
only
here.
30 cities, was it, that we think are even are required to do this?
Well,
40-ish, somewhere
also,
around
you have
there?
to think, Sanitation District 1 has like 30 or 40 communities in.
Yeah, that's one of the.
So, I mean, that's a lot of municipalities all tied in one.
And I think you'll find it interesting, on the second page of your handout, under the permittee list,
yeah,
you'll notice the anticipated 2015 communities include the county of Scott.
yeah.
Yeah.
They're seeing this come down the path for them as well. So we're blazing a trail, but our county brethren will be immediately behind us. That's all we can discuss tonight. We're set up for the 9th. Mike, y'all, thank you very much. Made you come and didn't let you talk a bit, but it was helpful. Is there anything else on this topic?
Well, just in case they have to testify on our behalf that we're trying.
Testify that Karen said yea or nay on tax, right?
Is there a motion to adjourn?
Motion.
Second.
Third.
Vote with your feet.
Motion.